Nanobreaker is a new hack-and-slash action game from Castlevania producer Koji Igarashi. What's that you say? Sounds wonderful? Yeah, well, you might want to taper your expectations a smidge. While Nanobreaker does often feel sort of like an offshoot of 2003's Castlevania Lament of Innocence, it also lacks any of the inherent charm of that game, or really any other generally good hack-and-slasher out there right now on the market. In Nanobreaker, you play as a fair-haired cyborg named Jake. Apparently some bad business has gone down on a government research island called Nanotechnology Island. See if you can guess what it is they were researching. Yeah. Tiny robots have taken over the island and its inhabitants, turning them into crazy robot zombies called Orgamechs. Jake is sent in by an appropriately gruff military general who seems completely oblivious to the entire situation. And he's told to protect a female scientist, arguably the most obnoxious female scientist ever put into a game. She's been sent there to try and shut down the main computer, but she went in alone and you have to save her from the evil Orgamechs and whatever, yeah. Throw in a lot of mindless hack and slashing, almost no plot to speak of, and an evil rival cyborg named Keith. Yep, that's his name. Jake and Keith. A couple of tough-sounding names, aren't they? Real tough cyborgs, Jake and Keith. When does Tad the cyborg show up? Or where's Charles? Can he be far behind? Yeah, anyway, that's pretty much the gist of the game. You play Nanobreaker pretty much as you would any other hack-and-slash action game. Armed with a government-issued plasma blade, or just basically a fancy way of saying future sword, Jake starts out with a limited number of abilities, which include 4 different types of slash attacks, a fairly unwieldy jump, and an energy whip which extends from the blade itself and pulls enemies toward you. The gimmick of the combat system is Jake's ability to string together combos via combo chips that are sort of scattered throughout each of the levels. You can kind of interchange these chips in between. They all have their own different levels, which basically just attribute to how many hits you can land, etc. But apart from these combo moves, which are mostly unnecessary, save for a couple of boss fights here and there, and a few other earnable abilities, that's about all there really is to the combat in the game. While these elements would normally be plenty fine for making a captivating hack-and-slash game, the remaining components of Nanobreaker just conspire to bring the whole experience down. The combat itself is pretty much defeated by the absolutely idiotic enemy AI. Enemies will just sort of lumber towards you, sort of flailing their limbs or occasionally shooting their guns or whatever at random sporadic intervals. And no one ever really puts up much of a fight by themselves. In fact, the only reason the grunt enemies present any challenge at all is because there's just so many of them at once. They kind of group together, they'll bunch up on you, try to surround you. But that's it. That's all they know how to do. And you're way faster than them, you can run by them, there's some combos you can do to one-hit kill them, or you can just run away altogether. The game actually lets you just kind of run through rooms and just kind of escape stuff, save for a couple of sections where it actually requires you to beat everybody. So you could actually theoretically just run away from enemies for like 2/3 of the game. The level designs are also just really boring. Nanotechnology Island is set up in pretty standard hack-and-slash fashion. A lot of small, cramped rooms to kind of run through, each filled with a few different bad guys. The layouts are just terribly linear. It is actually impossible to explore anything, even if you wanted to, because there's really nothing to explore at all. There's no interactivity with the levels, save for a couple of buttons or levers you'll just kind of whack with your sword, and a few areas where you find yourself dealing with one of the game's exceptionally awful jump puzzles. The most challenging portions of Nanobreaker come in the form of these periodic and infuriating bouts with obnoxious jump puzzles. At times, Nanobreaker seems like it desperately wants to be some kind of platformer, and when it tries to be one, the results are less than enjoyable, shall we say. The game also just doesn't look good at all. Nanobreaker is quite possibly one of the drabbest looking games on the PS2. Just ugly, muddy textures, color schemes that kind of range from gray to grayer. The character models are basically the same. Jake, he has kind of this badass cybernetic body and whatever, but his head looks like sort of like a cross between Sephiroth and Kate Moss. It's just dandy looking, doesn't look right. The Orgamechs, they look kind of intimidating in cutscenes, but in the game they're just very uninteresting looking. They're just like, there isn't much detail to them at all. There is one neat visual effect in the game though, in the form of the just absolutely insane amounts of blood that will just kind of spurt from fallen enemies. The game even tracks how much blood you spill with a little meter at the bottom of the screen, and it gives you some like health bonuses and stuff based on it. It's silly, it's kind of overdone, but at the very least, hey, the blood does kind of add some color to the otherwise colorless backgrounds. In the end, Nanobreaker is just kind of a game that seems almost a little too content with its own mediocrity. A lack of ambition doesn't necessarily translate into a bad game, but everything about Nanobreaker just seems so well-worn and half-hearted that it lacks any single standout feature of any kind. Barring any desperation for another random mindless action game to throw into your PS2 collection, you should definitely skip out on Nanobreaker.